Zephaniah 1 this week? Maybe I shouldn't ask that question. I should maybe say, is that a rhetorical question? Rhetorically speaking, did anyone read Zephaniah this week? The first chapter, in fact, we go a little bit into chapter 2, just to, I guess, give some relief at the end of chapter 1, because it has a lot to do with judgment. And we hear a lot about not being judgmental or not judging others. And I understand in the spirit that it's meant that we should be careful before we come down on somebody or for what they say or what they do or their poor fashion sense or anything like that. But, just as a general observation, the truth seems to be the sentiment to not be judgmental is unevenly applied, right? It's inconsistently applied. By that I mean, we usually struggle keeping from judging others, even if it's in our own minds. We do that. But we take great offense at someone judging us. Right? That said, it's really hard to get around the fact, I believe, that so much of our society is structured around making judgments. I mean, some people judge like it's their job, and in fact, it is their job. And millions of people tune in to watch some of them making judgments, whether it's Judge Judy or if you're old school, Judge Wapner before he retired. I mean, they've had Judge Joe Brown. They've all had their day, right? When we need to get our pipes repaired, or if we wonder where to eat, if we need a place to stay, well, what do? We go online. We look to see how people judge it. Right? That's what we do. You don't rent a place on Airbnb without reading people's reviews of that place that you're going to stay. If there's a bad review for a place, we don't look at it and go, oh, this person is being so judgmental. Oh, the rats can't be that bad. We'll just stay there anyway. We don't do that, right? We don't go there. We avoid it. And what about Yelp, right? We're all invited to pass judgment on how someone makes a taco. That's what Yelp's about. I don't Yelp much, even though Tina really encourages us to, right, Tina?
Well, yeah, for you.
Yes, there you go. Absolutely. We would love for you to do that, but I don't Yelp much. And it's just a hunch, and maybe you Yelpers out there might know better. It seems that people that are unhappy are more likely to Yelp than people that are happy about it. I mean, I was thinking about this. I really have to be blown away by a place's awesomeness to get on Yelp to give them a glowing review. And maybe this is why they're begging at every single place you go to now. If you could they circle the survey online. If you could just do the survey, please. And it's nonstop everywhere I go. I was at Starbucks yesterday. I know that's surprising. And this guy walks in right in front of me. It was early in the morning. It was like 6:30 or 7, I think. This guy walks in right in front of me. And when he goes in, he's the second person in line. Now, the guy that was first in line, he was heated. He was angry because I guess he'd been standing there, I don't know how long, probably 3 or 4 minutes maybe, and no one had helped him. Well, the guy in front of me kind of took it as his own personal crusade, and we hadn't been there more than maybe 35, 40 seconds before someone came to the register, and all of a sudden he was just like, "You need to help people. You need to help your." He was like going off, and she was like, "We're trying, sir. We're busy." She was trying to be like, "Calm down, bro." But he just started wigging out, and he was talking about, "You're going to get 0 stars. You've lost a customer." And he was like, he would not stop. She finally had to be like, we can just call the police. And people are like all charged up. It was a little awkward. But you think about even award shows they're based on judgment. I mean, the Emmys and the Oscars, they're just so judgmental. I mean, shouldn't everyone get a trophy? I mean, if Dunkirk gets a trophy, shouldn't Daddy's Home 2 get one as well? I mean, come on. Everyone needs a trophy. And these days, as we all know, with our social media presence, it's easier and easier for people to just kind of say whatever they want to say and make their judgments, whatever they're thinking. There's this recent episode of The Orville that kind of exaggerated our tendency to judge, to want to quickly jump on one side or the other. I wanted to share this little clip with you, and you'll pick up on it pretty quick, so I'm not going to explain it. You're just going to see the society that's based on social media judging.
Hey, Jess, good to see you back.
Oh, thanks, man. I think that was probably the worst flu I ever had.
Well, hey, looks like you lost a few pounds.
You know, I'll take it.
Oh, look at that. How nice is your grandma, huh? How much does she love you?
Thank you, Grandma.
Oh, you are so welcome, dear one. What do you give to grandma?
Thank
Oh,
you,
good
honey.
girl. That's it.
Oh, what you doing? I'm really sorry. I wasn't looking.
Kind of creepy, right? Kind of makes you kind of glad Facebook never came out with that dislike button that everybody seemed to want. Now, so clearly there's this wide range and there's some confusion about being judgmental, because there's being judgmental in a hurtful way, and at the same time we rely on people's judgments. We look to them for insight and direction, and we'd be foolish not to make some judgments ourselves. One of the most commonly misinterpreted verses in the Bible is Matthew 7 that says this: "Judge not that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you." Now, people will misuse this verse to condemn anyone saying anything about someone's behavior being wrong. When quoted in this manner, right, this verse becomes the big no-no against declaring any specific action as sinful or wrong, because doing so would mean you're judging someone. And this is why this kind of verse is why it's so crucial to look at a verse in biblical context rather than just plucking it out and reading into it our own philosophy or the culture's philosophy. So this passage in Matthew 7, is not forbidding judgment, but it's speaking against hypocrisy. That's really the core of what it's about. All the surrounding verses follow that theme, speaking out against hypocrisy. Jesus follows up this warning against judgment with that explanation. We will all be judged by the same measure that we use. In other words, if we can't hold to the standard that we use, we have no business applying that standard to others. So what Jesus is telling us is we should all amend or deal with our own behavior and live properly, live in obedience to Him before exercising judgment and helping others to do the same, right? In fact, the next verse clarifies this, Matthew 7, 3 and 5. "Why do you see the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your brother's eye." So this passage is actually a condemnation of hypocrisy, not judgment. Jesus is telling us to deal with our own behavior and attitudes before attempting to help anyone else, right? If we attempt to judge first, our judgment is going to be flawed by our own splinters. But the passage is in no way forbidding judgment. It's saying that judgment should begin in ourselves. In the next verses, and we know this is what this means. The next verses, actually, Jesus requires us to have good judgment. He says, "Don't give what is holy to the dogs, nor throw your pearls before swine." Now, wouldn't this require judging who the dogs or who the swine are in the scripture? Of course. Of course, we're called to make judgments with caution and wisdom. So there's actually tragic irony in this passage, because it condemns those who most aggressively accuse others of judging, because what are they doing? Well, they're condemning condemnation. Right? So it's ironic. To use it that way is actually hypocritical in and of itself. And that's not to say that we like to be judged. Most of us don't like to be judged. I think we get rightfully upset if we feel that we're being maybe prejudged prematurely or being unfairly judged. But I want to put out there that maybe sometimes we get upset when we shouldn't. Sometimes our own guilt or our conscience can be a response to being judged because it hits a nerve. Sometimes Judgment points out or reveals an actual wrongdoing in our lives or in our culture, like men wearing mesh shirts. That's never been a good idea. Something had to be said. Something had, you want that changed quickly? Something, right? But sometimes judgment can hold up a mirror to some of our poor decisions and sinful behaviors in our lives. So as a believer, as a disciple of Christ, we first should want God to weigh and judge our hearts. It should be part of our heart's desire. It's part of being repentant and humble before the Lord. That's why we see in Psalm 139, it says, "Search me, O God, know my heart. Try me, know my anxieties. See if there's any wicked way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." What's this prayer saying? It's saying, God, judge my heart. Tell me what's wrong in my life. The world does not like to hear about God being judge and that God is the ultimate judge. But there are over 70 verses that describe just that, God is judge. But people want to ignore or gloss that over. It's because we grow to like our sin. We become protective of our sin. We don't want to be told that our sin is destructive. Now, there are many people that would like to just take the subject of judgment out of the Bible entirely, right? They just want huggy Jesus. And that's a real thing, by the way. I thought I made up the term. No, it's a doll. It's Huggy Jesus doll. But that's what I get for thinking I'm clever. Some just want to say that, the selective passages of God of the New Testament, right? The Father of Jesus Christ, that's the kind of God who can never move in judgment. His love is so gracious, His love is patient, and so infinite, there will never be a time when God moves in vengeance. But here are just a couple of examples. Isaiah 66. "For the Lord will execute judgment by fire and by His sword on all flesh, and those slain by the Lord will be many." Isaiah 3:13. "The Lord arises to contend and stands to judge the people." Psalm 96:13. "Before the Lord, before He is coming, for He is coming to judge the earth, He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in His faithfulness." And in case we think, well, that's limited the Old Testament, Jesus spoke very frequently about the judgment of God. So the same Bible that tells us that God is a God of love also tells us that God is a God of vengeance. And if you think carefully about that, you will understand why a God of love also has to be a God of vengeance. Now, if we love someone, we hate anything that injures that person. We do not want harm to come to that person, right? As a parent, I have to tell my child, you just had a donut, so no, you cannot have a candy bar, right? If I tell them that, is it because I don't love my child if I want to keep something from them? No, it's actually because I do love my child. But what if they really want it? Well, no. Well, but what if they cry? No. In fact, we have a song that we quote often from They Might Be Giants, which is called, appropriately, No. And it goes, no means no, 1,000 times no. And if we say no, it means no, no, no. Right? Why? Because we love. We love. The very love that moves the heart of God to pour Himself out over the centuries in this effort to wake people up to their sin and their brokenness and to hear His call of grace and mercy is the same love that will make Him expel those who refuse all the magnificence, all the gift of His grace because they identify themselves as opposed to His will and fight the work that He's trying to do in the hearts of people. So Zephaniah's answer to our hope for the world is judgment. Now that may be hard to wrap our brains around a little bit, but if we really understand it, it's so helpful in seeing the heart of God. So Zephaniah is one of the minor prophets that hardly ever gets a kid named after him. The minor prophets are just called minor because they're not 50 or 60 chapters long, right? This one's 3 chapters. So he's not as long-winded as some of the others, and he's also not under 18, a wannabe prophet, as a minor prophet. It's a 3-chapter book. He's a little guy, but that's all we need. It is strong. It is hardcore. And I think we have a picture of Zephaniah, so you see what I mean. I mean, he was OG. He just laid it down. Verse 1 Verse 1 introduces him. And I'll probably mispronounce some of these, but you know what? I worked on pronouncing another word later. The word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, the son of Get another guy that didn't get any kids named after him. Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, got that one right, during the reign of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. I was almost spitting rhymes there with some of those. His name means the Lord hides. The Lord hides. Not like the Lord is hidden playing hide and seek. Like, where are you, God? It's more like the idea of the Lord hides his people to keep them safe, which is pretty awesome. So maybe more kids should be named that. That could be a tremendous title for this book. There's this universal judgment that is coming, but the Lord hides his people. So as a son of Cushi, that means he was a son of a North African Cushite, I'm going to say. But going back in his family tree before his dad, there was royalty in his blood. So he was a great-great-grandfather was Hezekiah, meaning King Hezekiah. Around 700 BC, the superpower of the time was the Assyrians. They were on the rampage, just, kicking butt and taking names. But Hezekiah pulled the people back to following God. And so God protected them from the Assyrians. Hezekiah brought in all these reforms. He got rid of the false worship in Judah, and God saved them. But in Zephaniah's day, which is only about 100 years later, Judah is again engaged in this false worship, and the new superpower is the Babylonians. Now, Judah had another king named Josiah at this point, and under him they rediscovered a book of the law that they were trying again to bring the people back from God, but there was still all kinds of nasty stuff happening in the culture. And so the hope was that, again, because they got the Passover back up and running, they were attempting to devote themselves to the scriptures, the hope was that, surely Josiah and his reforms are going to save us. God will give us his favor and will be protected. But Zephaniah stood up and said, no, that's not happening. Judgment is not going to be averted this time. So what we see in Zephaniah is a prophecy of judgment that is partially for that culture at that time, but it's wrapped in a greater judgment that is not specific to that time, that is beyond that. So what's fascinating is, yes, while he's predicting this military defeat in 600 BC, where God is going to judge, now it's interesting because he's going to judge the house of God, and he's saying there's no escape as the house of God, then the whole earth will be judged. The certain judgment in Israel on Jerusalem is a picture of the judgment of the whole earth. So this is where it goes beyond just that time. This is why he begins his prophecy in universal terms. So listen to the scope of this. This is verse 2. I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will sweep away both men and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. The wicked will have only heaps of rubble when I cut off man from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. See, I told you it was intense. I mean, there's no messing around here. It would be a stretch to get more comprehensive than that, right? I mean, he'd have to say, like, the moon, I'm going to use it as a cosmic cue ball, and the sun, I'm going to just snuff it out like a match, because I'm God. So the scope is to remove any doubt as to judgment that is coming. God is the creator. God is the judge. Everything. Verse 4 says, I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all who live in Jerusalem. Okay, so the clarification, you said everything, but, right, come on, surely not Jerusalem. I mean, everything else around. Surely not Judah. Everything. Every kind of person in Jerusalem who will come under his judgment, including religious and spiritual. Verse 4 continues, I will cut off from this place every remnant of Baal. And that actually is correct. I really looked it up. It's Baal. And we always say Baal, I think. But I bailed on that, and I looked up this, and it's Baal, a false god. The names of the pagan and the idolatrous priests, those who bow down on the roofs to worship the starry host, and those who bow down and swear by the Lord, and who also swear by Moloch, a false god. By the way, heard from Robbie in India, in his area, the government is forcing them to bow to the sun at sunrise every morning. So that has not gone away, this worship of creation, right? And in fact, they came, when he did not do that, they came into this church and burned all his New Testaments. So again, keep praying. We talked about persecution a few weeks ago. Keep praying for India and what they're experiencing. But we see that is still happening. Bow down on the roofs to worship the starry host, who bow down and swear by the Lord, and also swear by Molech, those who turn back from following the Lord and neither seek the Lord nor inquire of him. So all types. I mean, that's kind of blanket, right? There's the all-out false god worshipers, whether it's Baal, Moloch, or the self. There are the non-committal base coverers who are like, give me some of God, give me some of this guy, give me some of Eastern philosophy. I'm just going to mix it all up and hopefully it'll come out good. And those who've just stopped following God or never started following God, they're all there. And it's not only the religious coming over the judgment, it's the powerful and wealthy in verses 8 and 11. The princes and the king's sons and all those clad in foreign clothes. Wail, you who live in the market district. All your merchants will be wiped out. All who trade with silver will be ruined. And as the chapter continues, it's clear that God sees everyone, even the complacent. They're like, I'm just checked out. I'm just minding my own business. I'm just doing my thing. I'm just going to let this roll over me. Even the complacent are not under the radar. Verse 12, at that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who are complacent, who are like wine left on its dregs, who think the Lord will do nothing, either good or bad. And we even hear that in our culture today. God's not going to do anything. Where is God in this? God's light in this verse is like a searchlight. Right? Have you heard of the torch, the flashlight that's powerful enough to set things on fire? I mean, that's how many lumens this thing puts out. Now, some of you want to get this now. All right? This verse is saying God's justice, God's holiness, God's righteousness is so bright, it's so intense, nothing can hide, nothing can stand before it. Not Jerusalem, not the world. Verse 14 through 18. The great day of the Lord is near and coming quickly. Listen, the cry on the day of the Lord will be bitter, the shouting of the warrior there. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the corner towers. I will bring distress on the people, and they will walk like blind men because they have sinned against the Lord. Their blood will be poured out like dust and their entrails like filth. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole world will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. Now, at this point, that's pretty intense, right? At this point, Zechariah is speaking of the same events that Jesus talked about and John spoke about in Revelation, the day of the Lord. In the scope of time, it is near, as God measures time. It was near then, it is near now. The whole world. This is one of the most sobering chapters in the whole Bible. The day of the Lord is coming. And isn't that different to the way we usually think? I mean, if we want judgment, we are usually pretty specific. We're okay with judgment for them. Them. Over there. You know, those nasty people, those horrible people, those horrific people. But surely, there's some favorites. Right? There's some favorites, which of course would include me. And probably people I know that I would handpick, and because they're good people, or at least they're nice to me. Verse 18 again. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole world will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live in the earth. Sobering. And this is a really important biblical truth. Look at 1 Peter 4. For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? Now, if the righteous one is scarcely saved, where will the ungodly and the sinner appear? But let me repeat for Zephaniah. Judgment is our hope for the world. Zephaniah continues beyond chapter 1, thank goodness. All right? It's not over there. If it was over there, we could just go curl up in a fetal position at home and just wait. There's more. Again, Zephaniah means the Lord hides. We read that there is a place of shelter on that day. The truth is that we can understand God's grace and God's mercy on such a more crucial and core level when we digest and comprehend the gravity and necessity and inevitability of his judgment. When we can grasp even faintly some of his judgment, we understand better the extent of his mercy and his grace. If we don't understand one, how can we really appreciate the other? Why did Jesus have to come die? Why did the Son of God have to come and walk this earth and live a sinless life and expend his lifeblood on the cross at the hands of cruel, cruel torture? To spare us from his righteous judgment. That's the point. Have you given your life to Christ? Have you accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Then you should be aware that Jesus has experienced what Zephaniah has talked about already. The cry on the day of the Lord will be bitter, the shouting of the warrior there. Jesus is the warrior for us. Jesus died on the cross and said, "It is finished." For Jesus, that day he died was verse 15. It will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the corner towers. That judgment crashed down on Jesus' head, and he became a refuge for those who flee to him. God hides. What we must do is agree with the Lord's judgment and seek refuge in the Lord's King. This is what chapter 2 starts out as. Gather together, O shameful nation, before the appointed time arrives, and that day sweeps on like chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's wrath comes upon you. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, you who do what he commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you'll be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. And we know that in Jesus Christ we have shelter, we have refuge. And that's the sense of urgency for those that do not know him. We can get so easily caught up and just let the day come and the day come and the day go and the day go over and over again and be complacent about those that we know that don't know the Lord. And that should compel us to pray for them, to converse with them, to invite them, to hear of God's great mercy and love. So as we close tonight, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. On your chair is a blank card. You know someone that needs to know the Lord. You know someone that at least needs the opportunity to respond, to make the choice. And if you have that conversation yourself, amazing. That's amazing. That's what God calls us to do. But at the very least, you can pray and you can invite, because we're going to give the gospel here and people are going to make a choice. So what I would ask you to do is two things. One, write a prayer for that person that God is going to put on your heart that you're going to pray for. We talked last week about praying for an opportunity to have an opening. So write a prayer for that person. And then what I would ask for you to do is to write that person's name on one of these chairs. And we're going to pray for those people and see what God does. Whether that conversation occurs at your work or at your house or at Starbucks or in this room. But we want to step in faith, respond to the urgency, and say, God, I'm going to pray. And I'm going to actually put a name to that prayer. I'm not going to have a general prayer, oh Lord, people I know, just talk to them. We're going to say, I'm going to pray for this person. And we're going to see what God does. So, Brain will come up and do, Jason will do one song while we write and pray. And if you can multitask, you can sing with it too. And during that song, if you could write their name on one of these chairs as well. And then we'll do offering in between the two songs. All right? So let's pray. God, I pray that you speak to